Welcome back to another episode of Remotely Speaking Up. And we just concluded our block on enabling countries to work better remotely. And now we're starting a new block of 5 episodes on enabling individuals to work better remotely. So our first guest is Mr. Bill Banham, founder of the HR Gazette, and also one of the key and instrumental partners in Innovate Work. Is that right, Bill?
That is right. Yeah. Great to be here today.
Brilliant. Really good to have you. And Bill is here to talk to us on our first topic in enabling individuals to work better online, which is negotiating your terms and conditions of work when working remotely. So thank you so much, Bill, for joining us. And Bill is quite, I would say Bill is quite an experienced or seasoned remote worker. And he'll tell us a bit about his background before going on to tell us how we can work better, how we can better negotiate terms online. So over to you, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm assuming there, Rochelle, that seasoned doesn't necessarily mean old, although I do have a lot of grey hair.
Never.
But yeah, I've been working remotely for, about 8 years, pretty much now. So I'm Bill Banham, and I'm the founder of the HR Gazette, which is an online portal for HR folk, operations, talent leaders, and so on and so forth. I'm also the founder of the HR Chat podcast. Rochelle has been a guest on the podcast. Please do check it out.
Very honored.
And I'm the president and CMO at a marketing agency called I See Me Media, and also, as Rochelle mentioned, I'm the co-founder of an event series for HR and talent pros called Innovate Work, which was started in Toronto back in 2017, and now we're doing events all around the globe.
Yeah, which is impressive. I attended your Innovate Caribbean event, Innovate Work Caribbean, I think, which was the first of its kind for this year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, from Toronto to the Caribbean, and you're in Australia as well. Is that right?
Yep. So we're in the Caribbean, we're in Australia, the UK, and then across North America. And as our events are currently virtual, of course, we've split those up by regions or by time zones. So East Coast, Midwest, Rockies, and West Coast.
Brilliant. Right. So that's good to know. I wonder how you do it, but I guess you'll get into it a bit more. I suspect it's with a lot of key collaboration, which is great. Can you tell us a bit about your experience of working remotely, especially when it comes to negotiating terms and conditions? Because this can be a bit of a sore spot sometimes in the process of remote work.
Yeah, sure thing. So for me, I had your normal average day-to-day office job, if you like, when I was living and working in London in the UK. But because I'd previously had some experience of living in Canada, I knew that I wanted to move back over there, and I was very fortunate in that I worked for a London-based company who supported my desire to uproot and move to a different country, and that allowed me to get my first taste of working remotely for an organization. And obviously the relationship there was still an employee relationship as opposed to being a complete freelancer. So you've still got certain commitments, but also benefits of being an employee. But it also it threw me into the world of not just working in your pajamas, but the self-discipline that goes along with working remotely, and also the different ways that you need to find to communicate with your colleagues and with clients when you're disparate, when you're away from them. That actually helped me in my next stage, which was getting sponsored by an HR tech company in Canada. So I went over on a visitor visa, a 1-year visitor visa, and I'm like, right, I've got to make this work. I've got a year, go, bang. And I got sponsored by an HR tech company over there, but they were based in London, Ontario, and I was living in Toronto. They had board members and advisors who were in Toronto, so I was able to get FaceTime with them on a regular basis. But again, I was working remotely.
Yeah.
And again, in that situation, I was an employee of theirs, so it's very much a case of here's the contract, and then from that point, you negotiate your salaries and benefits and so on and so forth. But certainly not in the same way that you'd negotiate as you would do as a freelancer, which is what I kind of became after that point. I started my own agency, which perhaps I wouldn't have done if I hadn't had the experience back in 2013, 14, 15 of working remotely and managing things in a more autonomous manner. But certainly, Rochelle, the differences when it comes to negotiating terms and conditions and whatnot, which I'm sure we'll talk about more throughout this interview, very different when you're working for yourself essentially compared to a traditional employee-employer relationship.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there, because that is where the bone of contention comes, depending on the category that you are placed in, whether that is full-time employee, part-time employee, or self-employed. That really determines sometimes the amount of power you have to negotiate. I know I've spoken a lot to freelancers who have said often they take the contract that they're given because they don't feel like they have the any room to say anything or any room to negotiate. So what has your experience been as a freelancer?
Well, I think you've got to start with what is my product. If it's service offerings, that's still a product in a way, right? And it's on you to build that out in such a way that you can then present that on your website and clearly lay out what a potential client or customer is buying into. I think that greatly helps with setting expectations, and then the terms and conditions naturally come off from there. I mean, certainly when I started my own agency, there are a lot of great templates out there, legal templates that you can use to make sure that you're, in the case of Canada, CASL compliant, or in the US, CAN-SPAM compliant, or GDPR, as it is now in the UK, and so on and so forth. So certainly if you're in digital marketing, like I am, very important to make sure that you get those templates. Even better if you pay a little bit of money and speak to a lawyer and get them built out for you. But certainly if someone comes into a physical store, the products are on the shelves and they've got their prices on them, then you know what you're getting, and it should be that way with the services that a freelancer is offering, and therefore the terms and conditions should naturally flow from that.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I think it's really useful what you just said with regards to the templates that already exist, because that's a good guiding point. And I think for a lot of freelancers who that area, let's say negotiating or contracting or so forth, that's not really their specialty. And I think a lot of people struggle, especially let's say you've created your product and you're new to working online or new to working as an entrepreneur. Often the question is, okay, where to start with this contract, and how do I make sure I have the right sort of terms and conditions in? So I think, I think what you've said in terms of the template is a really good starting point. What would you say in terms of the amount of leeway you think you have to really have your terms and conditions accepted?
I think if you're the one who's presenting a proposal and a contract to a potential client, that you're creating that, that's your baby, and that includes the terms and conditions are in there. Providing that they're reasonable, then it should be a case that a client that you want to work with, that you like and you want to work with, it generally accepts those terms and conditions. Maybe they might want to request a few edits. But in my experience, I've never had a situation where a client has looked at a contract and said, oh, this is crazy, let's rip this up and start from scratch. Try and use common sense. Don't try and hide anything in there. I've certainly learned that you need to have extra things in there. I mean, heck, we're living in 2020, so make sure you've got a force majeure as part of your terms and conditions, for example, right? Other things like, although it's a Canadian-based business, I do a lot of business with US clients. So taking into account exchange rates, you might want to have a little caveat in there around exchange rates, so you don't get bitten too much if suddenly the US dollar plummets against the Canadian dollar, for example. These are little extra things that you can learn just or in my case, just by experience.
Yeah.
But if it's a pretty straightforward, standard, non-controversial set of T's and C's,
Yeah.
then you should have lots of leeway to present that and shouldn't have too much pushback.
Okay, so just for the sake of our audience, what would you say are some of the typical terms and conditions, or T's and C's, we can call them, so you mentioned the additional stuff, but what would be the typical must-haves in your T's and C's? Let's say
So yeah,
3 to 5.
3 to 5, gosh. Well, there's obviously got to be terms and conditions around ownership. You know, once you've created whatever product it is that you're offering, who then owns that? In my case, we often leverage, say, the magazine or events to help promote our customers and get their message out further. So you've got to be very tight around proprietary use of the messaging that you're creating, i.e., you know, if there's an article which is published on a site that I own, because that's got a community, is that still the property of the magazine, or does that belong to the client at that point? So be very clear around that. Be very clear around your deliverables and your timeline. Okay, accountability. You will not be given the same amount of leeway, the same time to settle in, if you like, as you would do if you were a traditional employee. If you're a freelancer, make sure it's tight, make sure that you can deliver upon it, and make sure that you can spell out in your T's and C's when a customer should expect to receive your services. But conversely, and I guess that takes me to number 3, be clear about what the payment structure is. You know, ideally get paid up front, but depending on what that package looks like, make sure that you clearly state the dates and the forms of payment and all the rest of it. If you don't want to take checks, state it in your T's and C's. There we go. I've had instances of that before, where I'm like, well, actually we're paperless, and they'll say, well, you didn't have that in your T's and C's, and we just do checks. So if you don't want to take checks, make sure you state that in your terms and conditions.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Gosh, beyond that, you certainly want to have use around data privacy. That's terribly important. And also, again, maybe this is more geared towards folk who are offering marketing or advertorial related services, but be very careful about the language around accessing a client's technology. So for example, if part of your services includes going into their CMS, their content management system, and uploading articles, say, you know, that's proprietary to them. So make sure that you have some decent, strong language within the T's and C's that states how you can go about doing that, who grants you access, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good bunch. Thanks for that. That's a really good variety. You also raised another interesting point, because in talking about your terms and conditions, you're very much speaking from the point of view of creating your own product. But let's say we have someone in the gig economy. And for example, when I was doing the research on digital nomads, we met some nomads in Thailand, in Chiang Mai, Thailand, who were working as writers for particular websites. So they were freelancers, but they didn't have their own product or whatnot. They were getting hired through these sites or getting jobs through these sites. And one of the persons I spoke to said she found it quite difficult. They sent her a contract before she began work with them, and she wasn't sure how much space she had to wiggle or to say back to them, okay, these are the terms you've given me. This is what I would like to add to that, or take away, or let's talk about this. What do you think is there any leeway in that sort of situation?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully by the time that you got to the stage when you're presenting a contract, or agreeing a contract, you've had good conversations with the customer, and you got a good sense of who they are, what they do, what they represent, what their company culture is, and hopefully what they're looking for, you know. And so as part of all of that, you should also have a sense of how much you can negotiate with them, how much you can push back on certain things. What I would say is try not to do that in an email. That can be misconstrued.
Yeah,
you know.
very true.
So right now we can't all easily get together and meet in person and talk about it over a coffee, but we can do things like this,
Yeah,
where we can still look each other in the eyes and have a conversation and talk it through,
yeah.
and talk about the possibilities. Um,
Mm,
it's business, so nobody should take it personally, right?
yeah,
And you'll probably get more respect from your customer if you negotiate
yeah,
and show them that, you know, you really care about the project, but you want to be valued accordingly.
that's true. That's very true. And I think it's really good to be upfront rather than incurring problems later in the process. So I think, yeah, sometimes that pushback can just show up relevant issues that might become an issue, a real problem later down when when you're getting near to delivering. So I agree. What about well, I'll ask you, have you had any bad experiences in that area in terms of a contract that you have already negotiated, or where there wasn't a contract, or whatever, if there were blurred lines? What's your experience been if you've had any on the negative end?
Well, I mean, some of the products that we sell are one-offs, you know, a sponsored interview, a sponsored article, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Inevitably, when you're dealing with one-off items at high volume, then not everybody's going to pay on time.
yeah,
So get used to that, people. Hello, welcome to the world of being a digital nomad and maybe working for yourself. But yeah, certainly if you're offering one-off products, transactional items almost,
yeah,
get used to late payments. It happens.
yeah,
Okay. But also give people a bit of leeway, for goodness sake.
yeah,
If you're putting payment due on receipt or within 7 days, that's a bit tight for some people. So,
mm,
you know, just bear that in mind. Any other bad experiences? I did have one client once that didn't pay up, frankly. Only paid part of the deal, and then became a nomad themselves and moved to a different country.
oh no,
So, I mean, you know, I've been doing this for many years now, Rochelle, and if
yeah,
I can only point to one,
that's quite
that's
good.
not, yeah, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah,
Um,
and at the end of the day, those experiences teach you.
they do, absolutely. And what that taught me is make sure that you're confident in the client as well. It's a two-way relationship,
Yeah, yeah,
you know. um, it shouldn't just be about you vying for that customer's business.
mm,
It should be the customer demonstrating to you that they're the right partner, and it's going to be a good fit, and you can work together, and they will adhere to their side of things, including payment.
yeah. And I think sometimes that might be the issue, because I think often a lot of digital nomads, especially those who are newer to it, are working in the way where they're being hired by platforms rather than, let's say, they're selling their product. I think often the perception is that they don't have the power to negotiate. And I think sometimes that can be the biggest hindrance in working online, because where they do have power, then sometimes maybe they're not quite aware of it and they don't benefit as a result. So then they might see certain conditions or presented with certain conditions, but they don't ask or question it for fear of losing the job. So yeah, it really might be a confidence thing over time.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Very often, if you're a gig worker, your clients are often going to be SMBs. I mean, that makes up 99% of certainly the
Yeah,
Canadian market, for example.
yeah,
And a lot of the leaders in those organizations, they'll be very hands-on. They'll be going through a lot of the same experiences as you anyway, frankly.
yeah,
They'll just perhaps be a little bit further on if they've got employees, etc. But yeah, for sure. Just be willing to have real conversations, authentic conversations with these people. That they'll understand where you're coming from, providing that you present it in the right ways.
yeah, that's true. And do you think that there is a different approach depending on the type of company that the person is working with? You just mentioned SMDs as well. Um, let's say negotiating with larger firms versus smaller organizations, or versus let's say the one man entrepreneur.
Yeah, certainly. So Most of my clients are on the SMB side of things,
Yeah.
under 200 employees typically.
Yeah.
If it's for the events, sometimes we get sponsors who are really big, you know. But is it different? Yeah, 100%. If you're buying for business with an enterprise level client, expect to go through a whole process starting with the RFP. Okay. And then you're going to be put in with a bunch of other bids with a bunch of other companies. And that process can take, so here's the other thing, sales cycle, that could take anywhere between 3 and 24 months, depending on how big that whale is and what those processes are internally within a large size organization. Whereas if it's a small company, and if you have the right conversations with the right people, who knows? You could do your homework, do your research, have a few conversations with them, get to understand what they're looking for, put your project brief together, put your proposal together, have another conversation, and get sign off within, gosh, a week.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Oh. Have you ever found a situation where a client did not want to sign a contract?
No, generally not. I'd say it's pretty accepted practice. Again, just goes back to your T's and C's. Don't put anything in there which is going to anger them. You know, be reasonable, and you shouldn't have any problems.
Yeah, that's true. I think sometimes it could be a red flag as well if a client doesn't want the existence of a contract period.
100%. If you're in that situation and they are being very hesitant about signing a contract for some reason, then stop and ask yourself why that could be and what the potential ramifications could be for that later down the line.
Yeah, that's very true. So I have here, in terms of some key priority areas, how would you encourage digital nomads or remote workers, because they're negotiating remotely as well, which I imagine would also impact on their, well, in some cases their confidence if they're not as experienced, or is different to negotiating in person. So what would be, let's say, 3 tips that you would give to a person who's trying to develop their negotiating skills, especially in this area when approaching businesses and signing that final contract?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of top priority areas that I'd suggest considering, resources. So build out what your own contingent workforce could look like. Okay, so you've created a service offering, but maybe you want to add to that and make it even more awesome. I don't know. So for me, I do lots of audio podcasts. Okay, but maybe I'm working with a client and they also want to have really cool animated videos. Build that out, because if you do that at the beginning and you've got folk who are reliable and they're tested, and you can call upon them, then that's just going to make your client ever so much more happy to know that they've got one point of contact. Ultimately, your clients are busy people. They don't want to have to outsource to multiple people if they can do it all through one source and have one conversation and all the rest of it. So work on your resources. Get your eggs in a row as much as possible. Hours. If you're expected to communicate with your clients in real time, then be prepared to adjust the hours that you work. So right now, at the moment, I'm in the UK. I've been in Toronto for the last 10 years. I'm currently back here during COVID, and I tend to adjust my hours. So I do Eastern time, maybe through to the end of the Pacific time workday. And that's really important. I mean, I've been fortunate in my work life, Rochelle, to live that digital nomad life where I'm sitting in a cafe in Athens working, or in Seville, or in Nashville, Tennessee. Okay, but with that also comes some not so nice aspects, which is you've got to work around their hours, and you know, you need to make sure that you're responsive, or if you can't be responsive in real time, make sure for certain that's in your T's and T's. Okay? So you're setting expectations, and that's the other one actually. The third priority would be around accountability and expectations. If you're a gig worker, you'll likely have a set scope, so ensure that you work within it, or if you do a lot more, it should be billable.
Yeah.
for sure. Don't be taken advantage of. You're not a client. Sorry, you're not an employee.
Yeah.
Okay, so the expectation of an employee sometimes is to do more than the 40-ish hours a week, or to jump from one project to another. If you're a gig worker, if you're a freelancer, you're probably brought on to work on a specific project with set deliverables. So stick to that. Again, going back to that metaphor, that example of going into a shop, and you've got the products on the shelves, right? You
Yeah.
know what you're buying in advance, and it should be the same way with a freelancer business relationship.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Hopefully, it helps, because I think with regards to the confidence, because I know for a lot of people that is often the issue, the power dynamic that is perceived between the client and the digital nomad. Especially, you mentioned again with being an employee, there are certain expectations versus being a freelancer. And I think for some freelancers, especially if you are now growing your business and you're worried about getting clients and keeping clients, often the worry is that if you push too much, or if you say what you want or so forth, then you won't get that client. But I think sometimes where you're seeing those warning signs or flags coming up, then perhaps it is worth walking away sometimes, even if that does mean losing business. So it can be a bit of a funny line to walk.
Yeah, I mean, as much as possible, I tried to take into what I do, what I learned when I was a kid working in bars and restaurants, and that is the customer is always right
Yeah.
most of the time. It's about customer. It's about customer service, right? If if a customer is kind enough to give you an opportunity to bring you into their organization as a gig worker, with the inflated pay that comes with that, and the extra freedom that you get from being able to work from home, etc., etc., then you should bend over backwards to make sure that they're happy and you're delivering everything that they want, and hopefully more.
Yeah.
Um, but by the same time, sure, if there are flags, you've got to stand up for yourself 100%.
Yeah, that's true. And that takes time. I think it's all well and good to have your contract. It's another thing to make sure you can actually enforce it when necessary. Yeah. So I totally agree. Well, Bill, you've given us a lot to think about in a very succinct space of time. So I really appreciate that. But of course, before you go, tell us, what is your funny travel story?
So I don't know how funny it is. I said to Rochelle before we started recording today, I could always throw in a joke to make up for the fact that it's not necessarily funny. But interesting anecdote is the story behind how our event series started, actually.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, I was covering an event in the US for the HR Gazette, and Rob Catalano, who is now the co-founder of Innovate Work alongside myself, he was there speaking at this event. And it was by going out after the conference, and frankly getting quite drunk together, and until the wee hours of the morning, when we were singing karaoke and going to all these cool nightclubs. It was because of that we bonded, and decided we really liked each other. And
Yeah.
when we got back to Toronto, we went up for a coffee and started talking about how we could build a community for HR people in Toronto, which became Innovate Work.
Brilliant. Over a nice drunken night.
Yeah.
I wonder how many of the world's most brilliant ideas started that way. We might be surprised. Well, thank you so much, Bill. Thank you for everything that you've shared. But just before we go as well, tell us about where we can find you and what is your next. Actually, tell us first, what are you currently working on? And then tell us where we can find you online.
Yeah, sure thing. So in terms of what I'm currently working on, well, we've got a bunch of events happening under the Innovate Work brand. We had one yesterday as we record this, which was for our West Coast audience. We've got a bunch coming up. We have one on November 10th, and that's our second Caribbean event, actually. So the big plan for us, by the way, just side note, is when we can all get back together again and shake hands and be in person, all the rest of it, we're going to bring a bunch of speakers and sponsors and things down to the Caribbean and have a jolly good party there. So super interested in building up the Caribbean event.
I endorse that.
Right, Rochelle, we're gonna have to see if we can get you involved.
Yeah.
So that's November 10th. We've got another Midwest event happening on November 18th. We've got another Rockies event. So the host city for that at the moment is Calgary, and that's happening on December 3rd. So that's keeping me busy on the event side of things.
Yeah.
And then we're producing more podcasts than ever for the HR chat show at the moment. So that's keeping me busy too.
Oh my word, it does sound like quite a full calendar. So, well, you've given our guests another podcast to look forward to. So that's HR Chat. And where can we find you online?
Yes, thank you. I didn't answer that bit. I appreciate the second opportunity to do that. So check out hr-gazette.com, Google HR Chat podcast. If you want to learn more about the Innovate Work event series, you can go to innovatework.co. The agency behind the HR Gazette is called Iceni Media Inc. If you go to icenimarketing.com, you can learn more about all the cool services we do there. I'm most active when it comes to social media on LinkedIn. I used to have a cool picture of me in a bow tie, but I've made it a little bit more chilled out since then. And I'm also on Twitter. I'm not on TikTok because I'm not that cool. And you can sometimes find me on Facebook, mainly LinkedIn and Twitter. So please do send a connection request.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Bill. And I've said just before we go about 3 times now. That's fine. We still have time. Can you tell the audience your one key takeaway before we sign off with regards to negotiating terms and conditions? What's the one thing you want our audience to remember about that?
Yeah, I think build out what your service offering looks like ahead of time. And as part of that, try and work out potential scenarios. Okay, so if I deliver A, there's going to be an expectation around B. So therefore, I should already have an answer for how I can deliver that, or if I can't deliver that part of it. Try and build out make out some scenarios, and that's going to really help you later on. Otherwise, you're going to be learning as you go along. If you're able to, I'd say get a mentor, get a bunch of mentors. I'm really lucky in my life that I've had some awesome mentors, and they've been able to give me the sage advice that I've needed along the way. And the first part of that, if you're just starting out and you're worried about negotiations, terms and conditions, all the rest of it, having someone who's been there and done it, it's just so valuable.
Absolutely. I can say I've benefited from the same thing as well. Because when I first started out, that was one of my concerns. And in some ways, I learned the hard way, but then other times through having a mentor, it really sped up that learning process. So
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, Bill, for joining us. This has been another episode of Remotely Speaking Up. We are in our Enabling Individuals block, having wrapped up our Enabling Countries block last week. And we started this block by talking about negotiating, or how to better negotiate terms and conditions when working remotely. So Bill's given us a lot of sage advice in this area. So I thank you so much, Bill. And this has been another episode of Remotely Speaking Up. Take care. Bye.